Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel I like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. Now, I really enjoy eyeshadow singles, duochromes, multichromes, blush, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitter, and today I thought I would do a ranking of all of the Oden's eye palettes that I have. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me, we're getting into it right now. If you're interested in this eye look, the video should be coming this week, and it is featuring the Makeup a Murder Bad Blood Collection eyeshadow palettes. So stay tuned for that if it's not already up. But in this particular video, we have 20 palettes to go through, and I did see that they are sneak peeking a new launch, so I'm really excited to see what that all is going to include. So I figured this would be perfect timing to do my ranking. All right, coming in at number 20, this is the original Soulmon palette, and it looks like this, and then the inside looks like this. Now obviously you guys know I'm not a warm tone neutral girly, so this is definitely not my color story, but I was super drawn to like basically the bottom row and the purple. I saw an eye look featuring the purple and this like black with blue pigment in it, or blue like sparkles in it, and I tried so hard to recreate it, but I think this is like hard panned, and I have tried so many things to try to fix it. I'm holding out hope that at some point I'll figure out another way to fix the hard pan, which is why I still have it, but it's definitely my least favorite. It's their old formulation, so they have done so much better since then. Coming in at 19 is the Alva 2 palette, and it looks like this. And the reason why this one came in so low is the pressed glitters, because I never think to go back to this palette because I'm like, ugh, I don't want to deal with the pressed glitters. And I really like that they took the feedback from their consumer base saying we don't want pressed glitters, and they have not included them in a single palette since then. So shout out to them for not doing that. But yeah, I kind of wish there was 2 other shades in there that would still sort of attract me into this palette. This is still some of the older formulations that they have. The newer formulations are much more like sparkly and dynamic for their metallics, so that's another reason why this one fell so low. And I do have the Alva 1 palette, I just haven't actually used it yet, so I didn't want to include it in a ranking. But I think that's the only Oden's eye palette that I have that I haven't used. Next up is the Saga Freya palette, and it looks like this. This is like the Taco Bell colors, right? And it's just because it's a lot of warm tones. I picked it up originally because the greens and the silvers in here really called my name, but then once I had the palette, I just discovered that I don't tend to reach for it very often because I don't like the complementary like orange and brown shades. But like these 3 shades, these 2 shades, I really like. It's these 4 that I just don't care too much for, which is why it came down. All right. Next up is the Red Dragon from It's Judy Time, and the color story looks like this. This was one that originally I was like, I don't think I'm gonna get it, and then the more I saw it, the more I was like, yeah, I think I really do want to get it. And I do like the color story a lot. I like the pop of like the olivey green and this multi-chrome in here. I think this like true red is quite nice as well, and I like the depth of this shade. Like, I'm glad it went very deep and dark, because I think Judy tends to do more like light to mid-tone, very like soft wash of color kind of eye looks, and that's not me. Like, I like something that's a little bit more bold and vibrant, so I really appreciated that she added some depth into this palette. But it is warm tone neutrals, so it fell a little bit lower for that reason. Next up is the Hummingbird palette from Oden's Eye and Tina the Fancy Face. I like the packaging a lot. I think it's really cool. And the inside color story looks like this. Now you do have a multi-chrome in here, which obviously you can see is very like special looking. I like the colors individually, but when I look at this palette and try to put the colors together, I get kind of baffled and frustrated. Like this palette just doesn't like speak to me the way I wish that it did. So even though I like the packaging, I like the content creator, I like the multi-chrome, I like the shades individually, I just have a hard time putting this together. So this really turns into more of like a complementary palette to other things, and I dip in and grab like the metallic, the multi-chrome to sort of accent other eye looks. I have the same trouble with the next palette, which is the Oden's Eye and Betty Jean Planet Spirit palette. Again, the multi-chrome in this palette is probably my favorite out of the 3 palettes that were done in this format, but the color story just throws me for a damn loop, because the greens, the oranges don't seem to go together. They also don't seem to go with anything else in this palette. And then you've got like 2 pinks that are very similar to one another. You've got sort of a violet toned purple here, but then a grape toned metallic, so they don't even seem to go together. I don't know. Betty Jean makes awesome eye looks, and I really, really like her content in terms of the creativity that she shows. So I'm sure for her, this is like a cakewalk palette to work with. But in my mind, I get kind of lost when I open this palette, so I end up usually just using this, and then I keep it moving. All right, next up is another collab palette. This is the Trick or Treat palette from Angelica Nyqvist and Oden's Eye. This is part of her second, is it her second collab or her third? I think it's her second. Anyway, I do like this color story, but I like the other half a little bit better, which is why it's a little further up in the ranking. Obviously, the warm tone neutrals are not my vibe, but I do really like this yellow shade here because it's almost an iridescent. And then I really liked this green shade a lot. It reminded me, oh no, it reminds me of the green shade in this palette, which I forgot to rank entirely. So I'll show you this palette here quick. Like you can kind of see the two greens side by side there. They do look super duper similar. So it reminds me a lot of this particular palette, which is why I liked this one. But it's super, super Fallout City. Like it made a huge, huge mess when I tried to use it. So that was kind of a minus. Well, I guess I'll leave the other two palettes here just for the sake of mentioning them. But the Alva 2 Mini Forest palette is the other mini that I didn't show just yet. And this one, again, it's just like, it's not my favorite. I got it in a mystery box, and I was just glad that I got something that I didn't already own, because that was a risky gamble on my part, getting a mystery box from Oden's Eye. I think the colors themselves are pretty, but I just have trouble putting them together with the mattes that they included in here. Like I almost wish this was just a pure metallic palette. That way I could go get mattes from somewhere else, and this would just be like special shades. All right, next is the Nords palette, which looks like this. And this is the old formulation before they revamped it. I think it's a pretty color story. I love the shades on the bottom row. I love this multi-chrome here. And I even like this sort of silvery taupe with gold reflex in it. I think those are really cool shades. The mattes are all very deep and dark, so I find myself struggling to just use this palette. I need to bring in something with a little bit of light in it just to kind of balance it out. But in general, I think it's a pretty color story. I think it's a nice palette. I like the packaging, which is why it's kind of middle of the road. All right, then getting into some Christmas stuff, I have the Hey Reindeer palette, which is one of the Christmas palettes from this past year, and I really liked this palette a lot. I think it's such an interesting, like, funky color story. You've got some really nice, like, kind of pale, soft shades, which for me work okay on my skin tone. I really love this deep dark blue that's in here. This candy cane shade is a beautiful multi-chrome on a pink base, which I really like. This iridescent pink is quite nice, and I love this like sort of grapey metallic purple that almost pulls like a gunmetal. I really like that as well. So in general, I like this palette a lot. There's just other things that I liked better. Next up is the Merry Christmas palette. This is part of their first Christmas collection, which was from 2 years ago, I believe. And I originally like opted against buying this palette and then bought it later. And I'm so happy to have it. I really, really like these top two rows, especially this shade Snowman is such a special, like, taupey with like pops of green and like gold. It's just a very special, interesting, dynamic shade that I don't see in other palettes, so I was really happy to get that one. And then I do really like this shade as well. Again, the sort of warm toned neutrals I don't care too much for, but I think everything else in this palette makes up for it. Next up is the Snowdream palette, and this one, I was even more excited for this one than I was for the Hey Reindeer palette this year, and it's because of these like minty type shades in here. This shade, this shade, this shade, this shade really caught my attention, and I enjoyed playing with this palette so much, although most of the time when I came in here, those were the shades I was going for. I wasn't really running to use like these browns or reds or anything like that, so for me, it's like half and half. I love half the palette, and the other half I could kind of take or leave, so that's why it's sort of middle of the road. Next up is the Little Ghost palette, again from Angelica Nyqvist, and it looks like this. Now obviously blues, purples, pinks, that's my vibe. This bottom row I could really take or leave, like even that would have been just a stellar color story. I'm glad she included these shades because they are like her vibe for sure. And I'd be curious to try to work this one into a look somewhere at some point, but in general, the sort of orangey rusty shades are not for me. Coming in at number 8 is the Sea Talk palette from Lauren May Beauty, and it looks like this. Now, in terms of color story, I do really enjoy the blues that are in here. I think this iridescent shell shade is very pretty as well. I even like the chartreuse that's in here. The browns, like these two browns in particular, I could take or leave. I don't really even go for those browns very much, but these sort of like gray toned brown, like almost raisiny browns, I really liked. I've used those to make just like a simple eye look on multiple occasions, and I've really liked how that came out. So for me, this palette moves up a little higher even though it has neutrals in it, because they're neutrals that I would actually use. All right, coming in at number 7 is the Jewels and Gem palette. This is a collection that released, I believe, last summer, and I really liked both halves of this collection. I have both palettes. You'll see the other one coming up shortly. This was a really special, interesting palette to me because it's very cool toned. It's like mauvey, rosy, and navy, but like desaturated, very cool. And I liked that they did that with the undertones for this particular palette. Even the like greenish shade here and the matte that goes with it are very like desaturated and cool in undertone, which I just thought was really special because I don't think we see that as much in other palettes that have similar colors here. They tend to pull very warm. So I was really intrigued by this. I love this Rhapsody shade and Paradise, and what is this? Elatedness is like super sparkly and dynamic, so I really like that one as well. Overall, very beautifully done palette. I love the packaging, so it came up pretty high on the list. Next up is the Flora Story palette, and this one is really pretty as well. It's soft greens and purples, which definitely are a vibe of mine. I know that Makeup Just for Fun, when she does eye looks, she really likes greens and purples. Those tend to be her favorites, so this is very befitting of her as a collab in a palette. I think the multi-chrome in here is quite stunning as well, and I do really like this sort of champagne-ish pea-toned green. Like, it's just a beautiful light shade. So this one came up number 6. Coming in at number 5 is the Stone and Rock palette, which looks like this, and it's the army green half to the Jewels and Gem palette that we already saw. I had a hard time placing this one either above or below Jewels and Gem because I just think this one is so pretty and interesting, but again is a little bit warmer. One of the things that this one kind of suffers from is you have a lot of like very similar shades. Like these two shades are super similar on the eyes. These two shades are going to look very similar, so I kind of struggled with placement for this one in my ranking. And then this shade here, although it's a really pretty iridescent shade, is very cool toned, like an aqua teal shade, and so for me it just doesn't seem to go with the rest of the palette. So there are some critiques that I have for this one, even though I still think it's a great color story. I have quite the precarious palette perch in front of me. All right, coming in at number 4 was the Oden's Eye and Giant Wolves, or Oden's Eye and Annette from Annette's Makeup Corner. This is the Giant Wolves palette, and it looks like this. This is probably one of my favorite color stories overall. It's used less frequently than the palettes that come before it, so that's why it's not ranked at number 1. But I think if I had to pick out one single most innovative dynamic color story that they've ever done, this would probably be it, just because I think it's such a pretty cool toned color story. But again, there's just a couple things that I use a little bit more, so I wanted to feature them higher on the list. But I like this size, like this book size. This is quite a nice size for a palette. All right, these next 3, I could put them literally in any order and still be satisfied with the outcome of my list. But for now, coming in at number 3 is the Hela palette. And I think I put this one up higher the last time I did a ranking of Oden's Eye palettes, but I'm going to put it at number 3 for now. It's a very pretty color story. Even though you have some warmer neutrals, they pull more like olivey green rather than like orangey brown, so I am more tolerant of those shades, and I do think shades like this Fluoresce and the Golden Bridge are very nice shades. I love the mix of pinks in here. Sparkly black, 10 out of 10. I like the River shade because it has this kind of teal blue over a brown base that I really like, and then double-sided is the iridescent multi-chrome for this particular palette. So I think the mix of the greens, the pinks, and then this sort of like dark moody row is very interesting. And then of course, like the medical person in me loves the packaging with the, you know, skeleton and everything else on it, the anatomical heart. Very cool. All right, coming in at number 2 is the Soulmon II palette, and this one I think I knocked it down a peg because I don't care for this packaging as much as the others. Like the suns and moons I think are pretty, but because there's so many splotches of like orange and yellow that sort of disrupt the green, blue, purple, I just think it looks a little muddy. Like it's just not my favorite. So packaging -1, but everything inside 10 out of 10. I love the color story. I like that it's sort of this beautiful soft rainbow kind of thing. They're like bright, but also, you know, how do I want to put it? Like they go from very soft and bright to more like deep and moody, which I really appreciate. And I love the shades that they picked in here. This shade here in particular is one of my like favorites out of my entire Oden's Eye collection. So I knew it had to be coming up to number 2. And coming in at number 1 is the Christmas Eve palette from last year. Now, not only do I love this packaging because it's very like green, blue, purple, cool tone silvers, hollow, all that kind of fun stuff, but the color story inside also fits that quite well. I like that you have some pops of yellow in here. Obviously, this shade is not a shade that I jump to very often, but everything else in here I quite love. This multi-chrome is gorgeous. The silver is gorgeous. I even love this more like taupey, slightly warmer toned silver. The mattes that are in here blend really nicely together, and I think you can make some beautiful kind of like smoky blue eye looks with this palette. All right, and with that said, that is my entire ranking. I think that is officially 22 palettes that I ranked. I want to know, do you guys have like a top 3 or a top 5 of your Oden's Eye palettes? I would really find that interesting to see what your favorites are compared to mine. Are you guys planning to pick up any of the new palettes? I am very tempted. Of course I'm tempted. I'm always tempted by Oden's Eye. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.